everybody, and welcome to our March session of the Oracle Spatial Technology series in the Ask Tom Off series. I'm glad that you joined this session where we have David Lapp as a special guest, and David agreed on telling us some new stuff about Oracle Spatial Studio, and I think he's prepared pretty much to show you live today, so hopefully everything goes smooth as expected and as tested. So before David is taking over, I just want to ask you to put your questions in the Q&A channel of this session. Beside David, we also have Denise in the session. Denise and I, we are going to monitor the Q&A box and pick up your questions, and we'll answer them as good and as fast as possible. If there's anything we can't answer or David should better answer, we will pick this up at the end of this session. Okay. So, David, just grab the screen, take over.
All right.
And
is my audio okay, Karen? You can hear me
yep,
right?
I can hear you fine.
All right. All right. So, yep, as Karen said, this is a sort of an update on new Spatial Studio stuff. We haven't done one of these in a while, and so this is going to be mostly a live demonstration of just new features, and you're encouraged to put questions in the chat, and we'll be glad to answer any questions. There's just a bunch of new features that are sort of accumulated over the last year. Again, we haven't really done one of these in a while, so this was a chance to just show some things, some a little newer than others, but probably most of it new to folks, and mostly some sort of end user sorts of features, but also a couple of developer-oriented items that are that's worth covering. As always, there's you have the ability to go back and look at previous recordings of these webinars with all kinds of topics in our spatial series. So I definitely encourage you to check those out. And with that, I'm going to just start assuming there may be a couple folks that don't really know anything about spatial to begin with, which is sort of the foundation that Spatial Studio sits on top of. So I'm going to take just a minute or two to set the context for any folks that are sort of new here. So at Oracle, our database is a converged database, handles lots of different forms of data beyond relational, and spatial, geospatial data is one of those. And because everything happens somewhere, really the location component and the ability to sort of work with location belongs in the mainstream of data management. So that's what we do at Oracle. We have native spatial capabilities in the database that allows you to not only manage and process, but ask all kinds of questions about location and location relationships in the mainstream context of database management, and ultimately put that into business processes. So we let you store points, lines, and polygons, and I've got a bunch of examples here of what that represents on the left, and then on the right are the kinds of questions that you're able to answer with the spatial platform in the database. And these are sort of the most basic forms of geospatial data, but it goes beyond that to working with other forms of geospatial data like 3D data, imagery, connected networks, and the ability to traverse through them. And then again on the right, sort of some of the kinds of questions that those capabilities allow you to answer. And it goes beyond that as well, and there's all kinds of capabilities in the spatial platform. And these are things that the Oracle database through Spatial enables, including things like geofencing, where you monitor objects that move in and out of regions and send messages, and other spatiotemporal features. And so there's a lot beyond sort of the basic essentials that I'll be focusing mostly on today. So that's sort of what goes on in the spatial platform as a whole. In practical terms, we have a native spatial data type, this SDO geometry data type. It's just a column type that lives in any Oracle table alongside other traditional columns like numbers and strings. And then you use that type in standard SQL to ask all kinds of questions about relationships, like the example on the right, to find out which parcels, which properties are within a predicted flood area. So it's really all about treating spatial data as just mainstream data and being able to answer important operational and business questions with that data. And there's a huge library and portfolio of spatial operations, measurements, calculations, spatial relationship operators that allow you to answer pretty much any question about location and location relationships that you can envision in the database. So how do you access these capabilities? Well, looking first at the top left in that sort of coder area, of course, it's a native database capability. So you use SQL and PL SQL, and by extension, some of the other developer capabilities of the database, like Oracle REST Data Services and Apex. All these things allow you to go hands-on with this capability. And on the bottom left is what we're going to focus on today. The no-code self-service way to work with these same features is Oracle Spatial Studio, and that's going to be the focus of today. And then over on the right is really the geospatial industry, which natively supports pretty much universally the Oracle Spatial Platform as the geospatial data management platform. And that right side is important because it means everything we look at with Spatial Studio and with SQL it does not represent sort of a hard choice in either or between working with spatial that way versus working with sort of your favorite open source and commercial tools that you might use. In reality, you work with all these things together and let the sort of the best tool do the job, whether it's coding or an open source or commercial tool or Spatial Studio. You can blend all these things together and find sort of the sweet spot for your organization. Spatial Studio is this no-code self-service tool that we're going to be focusing on. It's just meant to allow you to work with these spatial features in the database without having to do any coding. The code that gets generated is accessible and visible should you want to use this as a way to sort of generate some basic examples to run with, but it's certainly not required to do anything with code with Studio. Studio is a free application, a free JEE application that you can run in the cloud. It's on the Oracle Cloud Marketplace. You can run it on premises. You can even run sort of a sandbox on your laptop. And there's a couple of links here that we will share. Perhaps at some point, Karen or Denise might put those in the chat, and they're in the deck as well. So that's what Spatial Studio is. And we have other Ask Tom recorded sessions that you can find that sort of give general introductions and overviews of Spatial Studio. So what I really wanted to do was to take the time today to focus on some of the features. I'm saying selected enhancements. I sort of picked what I thought were some of the most interesting things to show that folks might not be aware of that have been playing around with Spatial Studio. And even if you're brand new to Spatial Studio, just so that you're aware that these are things that have been released across the Spatial Studio 23, version 23 kind of life cycle. So some of these have been out now since 23.1. Some of these are new in 23.2, but these are things that are new in 23. And I've sort of broken them up into things on the left-hand side, which just have to do with end users working with maps and sort of map visualization features that we'll look at. And then over on the right, we'll look at some examples of sort of analysis operations or operations performed on data. And then finally, there's a couple of developer-oriented items that I wanted to get to as well. So my hope is that I'm going to show you all of these things, number one, and number two, that they're all going to work because I'm going to try, attempt to do them all just as a live demo. And the one caveat to these all being part of 23 is the very last item, which I have under developers, this native web component, which is actually a preview. The one item in here, which is a preview of something that's coming up in our 24.1, our first 24 release, which we are planning for release next month. So everything other than that is generally available now, but I thought it's worth showing that last item. I think it's interesting. So with that, that's the PowerPoint preamble, and I'm just going to hop over now and start showing you stuff. So first of all, one of the links that I put there was the documentation link. And so in the documentation for Spatial Studio, at every release, we'll have a changes in this release guide that has all the new stuff. And there's all kinds of stuff. Some of them are a little more, some of them are real. I've tried to pick out the ones I thought would be most interesting to show. There's some more nuanced, sort of subtle things, but you can actually see for yourself all of the new features yourself by going to any of these releases and seeing, all right, what was new in 23.1, for example, and you'll see the new stuff listed there. Okay, so to jump right in here, I'm going to log in and just start by going through first a couple of these sort of just map visualization things that are new in maps. So the very first thing is if I just create a brand new project, the first thing that I'll mention that we've done just has to do with map backgrounds, the pre-configured off-the-shelf map backgrounds that we have. And we've had these vector tile maps for a while now, so that's not new. But what is new is that we've added the ability to go into a map and to change the language of all the labels, all the annotation in the map. So right now, the default for the maps is English, but you could pick basically any language you want. So I'll switch this map to Japanese. So so you can adjust the map language, and then as you can see, there's it's thoroughly thoroughly internationalized, and this is on a per map basis. So if you add, you can have another map next to this, and this one could be in Norwegian or whatever you like. So that's item number one. Item number two, just around background maps in general, is that we have added a set of styles that are meant for data overlays, in that they suppress most of the labels except for just essential labels, which is sort of what you want to draw the most attention to the data that you're overlaying. So this is a default sort of bright style, and we have this bright style, we have a gray style, and we have a dark style here. But what we've added are these styles that say map tiler data viz, and that's those are styles, again, that are optimized for your data overlays where you want as little as possible behind them. So if I switch over to this, you can see that now we have the same, generally kind of light palette, but most all of the sort of, most all the labels start to disappear. And so we have that for bright. We've got a sort of a light gray version of that as well. And I won't bother going to it, but a dark style. So these end up working really nicely if you have a bunch of color-coded data and all kinds of stuff on the map. You want the context of the background, but you don't want the background all the detailed road level labels and all kinds of other stuff to sort of get in the way. Okay, so that's just background maps. Now the next thing in terms of working with maps is the ability to, I'm going to say, disambiguate overlapping, lots of overlapping features. So what happens is we want to add a data set, and I think I've got a pretty dense data set right here. So these are fire locations, mostly wildfire locations. And so we have some dense data, and I want to be able to have a pop-up. So I'm going to configure the interaction of this map layer, and I want to see the fire, the time, and the number of total acres, and something else, maybe the fire year. So obviously, if I click on some isolated location, fire name unknown, that wasn't a great choice, but you get the idea. What happens when you click in some dense area, though, is you're not sure which you've clicked on. So now if you click on a dense area like this, in this case, I clicked in the vicinity of 2 locations, it shows you, you can explode that out and get the details, and it'll actually sort of change the highlighting to the item that you clicked on. And that goes for any of these areas where there's a lot of density. So in this case here, there's like 3 of them that are nearby. So that's just a convenient way to be able to, again, disambiguate the selection of items when there's a whole pile of them all together. Okay. Keeping with this same theme of working with a lot of data, and when you want to be able to filter it down, something that we've had for a while has been the ability to do an analysis, which is really just an attribute filter. And that filter, that ability to filter your data based on sort of a non-spatial attribute was previous to 23, it was limited to a single criteria. So what we've done now is in this non-spatial filter, we now allow you to create any number of conditions that can be grouped together through and or sorts of criteria. So you can create really whatever kind of sort of nested logic you want. So I'll call this fires filtered. And I want to filter these fire points. And now I can start to enter a number of criteria. So I'll say I want to know about total acres greater or equal to 100,000. So that'll be criteria 1. And now, as soon as I say, add criteria, now I can add another criteria, and I can use an and or an or criteria. So this time I will say I only want to look at I think I had a year. So I only want to know over 100,000 from 2012. Whoops, the operation is equals to 2012. And I'll add another criteria. So the last one will be like, this is category equals just wildfires, so WF. And now that I've done this, as this starts to grow, I can sort of keep track in a more compact way by collapsing these things, and I can see sort of a summary of my criteria. And these are all with an and criteria. And I could group these. I could create groups so that I've got a bunch of ands together, and then create another group and have, it's one set of criteria or another set of criteria. This can grow and again, be as sort of involved as you want it to be, but I'll keep it as this simple set of criteria. So that's really another new, not super exciting on its face, but in terms of what it allows you to do in Studio, it's important that we were able to add that. So now if I put this result in the map and look at what my filtered locations are, and maybe I'll make them so orange color. Now you can see that I have filtered those. So now the next thing that sort of builds on that is when it comes to being able to see, maybe it's sort of like a needle in the haystack in terms of, this isn't so hard to see, but there are times when you have a result and you really want to put a spotlight on something that you've identified in the map, but more of a spotlight than just a static color. So the other thing that's been added is a pulsing, we call it like a pulsing animated marker. So the way that you access this is, instead of having a circle style, these pulsing markers are a new type of symbol. So if we go to symbol, now we have all these different sorts of symbols that we can work with. And there's different symbol libraries that exist. In a moment, I'm going to show you creating a custom symbol, but this new one is under animations, and this is built in. So under animations, there's one type of symbol, which is a pulsing dot, and we plan to add more of these. So now you can see, we have this sort of pulsing animation thing, and it can be controlled. And so now it's, you can control everything about this thing. So I'll make it, larger, and maybe I want the duration of each pulse. I want it to pulse more slowly. I can change the inner color and the outer color and all this stuff. So that again is sort of a nice net new feature when it comes to putting a spotlight on something. To continue the same theme about how you visualize items, the other thing here that's new is when it comes to markers is custom map symbols, meaning you want to add your own. So if I go to map symbols, in custom map symbols, you can see I've got a few here that I've already loaded, but I will load another one. So let me load a little fire icon like this. So this is just a PNG file that I've loaded. So now that I've done that, I could actually come back to my map, and as an alternative, I now have this thing that I just loaded, so now I've got, a different, and, I probably want this to be maybe a little bit more subdued, whatever, you get the idea. So, so this makes for, between the pulsing animation and the ability to load custom markers like this, it definitely helps in terms of your ability to call out things that you want to call out. All right, now in terms of again, the ability to sort of call things out in the map and sort of highlight things that are important. The markers that you use and the styles are important, but taking that to the next level, another feature that we added was map redlining, and I just can't help but all right. So another thing that we added here to be able to call things out in the map is redlining, and redlining just refers to really just marking up a map and sort of being able to draw in an ad hoc way on the map to create whatever types of shapes you want, really to sort of annotate and call attention to things. So that feature lives here under this actions button, and there's this new action called Redline, and Redline opens up this Redline toolbar, and in that toolbar you can just start to draw shapes. So I'll start just by saying I'm going to draw click on that, and then I'm going to draw my very first red line. So that shape, that's just an ad hoc, shape that I've drawn. Maybe I also want to draw something over here because I'm interested in this area. All right, so you can draw these shapes, and then what you could do is a couple things. So I can come here and I can edit the properties of this feature, and the properties are basically the way it looks is a property, and its description is a property. And these are things that get saved. This is saved with the project, and as you'll see in a moment, we can actually export out these shapes and persist them if they're, if you want to use them for some other purpose. But you can assign properties, and then each one of these things can have its own sort of style. So, change the color of this one. This one I can leave alone. And the other thing that you can do with these is to move and reshape them. So the whole shape can be moved. Existing vertices can be you could reposition them, and you can insert new ones and then add, additional shapes like that. And you can delete vertices. You can just sort of ad hoc do this sort of drawing. And that goes for points, lines, and polygons, as many of these things as you want to create. Once they're created, they can be turned off and turned on. They're sort of their own special sort of layer in the map. Now, part of the reason for doing this is, as redlining, you might be coming in here and wanting to mark things up and say, this is an area that we need to do some further investigation on. There's something interesting going on here. But then you want to take this and maybe share it out or do something else with these shapes. And to do that, you can export these guys. So if we say export, because of the fact that we allow you to create points and lines and polygons, we provide the option to either take all the redlining you've done and dump them into one GeoJSON file, or alternatively, to separate them, which is usually what you would do, because a GeoJSON file typically would have just one type of geometry. But in this case, there is only polygons. So I'll actually do this. If I download that guy, I've got a GeoJSON file now. And just to show that what you create is truly like a, sort of an open, interoperable thing, I should be able to drag and drop. And there's the shapes that I just drew in Spatial Studio. If I click on it, you see testing 1, 2, 3. It sort of saved those attributes, which basically means I could be in Spatial Studio and do whatever kind of markup I want, redlining and so forth. And then that result could be shared with any other application. Everyone speaks GeoJSON. That can also be brought back into Studio. This could be brought back in, and you could end up saving this stuff in Spatial in the database if you want.
David, can I step in here, because there are a couple of questions regarding the redlining and also the icons. Maybe first starting with the redlining, the question actually was whether we can store the geometries in the database to do further to use geometry further on. So you mentioned that exporting as GeoJSON is one option, but also the writing the geometries.
Yeah, so the way you do that, right? The way you do that currently, we do not have a save directly to the database. What you would do today for that is you'd save it as GeoJSON, and then you would just come over here and you would say create a data set and just load the GeoJSON.
Yeah.
So okay. It's 2 steps. Save as you dump it out, and then you'd load the GeoJSON. It'll load it into Spatial in the database.
Perfect. And regarding the custom markers, you mentioned that you've uploaded custom markers as PNGs. Do we support SVG as well?
It's PNG. It's just images. It's just PNGs right now, I believe. Quite sure. Yeah, so it's just these image formats currently. We are looking at SVGs, and actually that sort of feedback, how valuable that would be to folks, is great for us to hear in terms of how we prioritize that. So that's one of the things that sort of we're considering. Okay. So if someone felt, hey, you really, really need to do that, then, then please share that opinion. Was that it, Karen, for the questions?
Yeah, and just to confirm, so right now we don't have a way to export or to save the geometries as CSVs. We do export it as GeoJSON, which is the standard format for it, right?
That's right. That's right. And CSV might be, you may be referring to saving it as CSV, where you've got the geometry as well-known text in the CSV, and we don't do that.
Yeah, it doesn't really make sense for the geometries and points to store them in CSVs. Yeah, but I'm not 100% sure whether Shahrukh is referring to points or to all geometry types.
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks a lot.
All right, I'm actually looking at the questions and Spatial Studio and Apex, stay tuned because that's one of the things I'm going to demonstrate at the end, which is actually the thing that enables that is the thing that's going to be the preview of this feature that's slated for next month. So stay
Yeah,
tuned for that. And then a
okay.
step-by-step guide for installing Studio on-premise and Tomcat. So we have that getting started that has kind of the pointers to everything, because that's all in the documentation, but the getting started points you to these different deployment options. So
Okay, thanks.
yeah. So let me just let me keep cranking away here because I got a couple more things here to get through. So that's I'm going to sort of wrap this bit up here in terms of the symbols and the redlining. The next item deals with spatiotemporal data. So I'm going to just close this and start here again. So a new here's a spatiotemporal example. All right, so we have had since the previous version of Studio, we had the ability to show animation of live spatiotemporal data, where there was a data feed into the database with sort of real-time or near real-time data, and we could render that as animated on the map to show things moving around, but that was based on a real-time feed. What's new is the ability to animate spatiotemporal data that is historical data that just exists in a table. So here's an example of such a table. So this is a table that has an ID, a coordinate, a UTC time, and the ID of an object that's moving. In this case, I only have one, but there could be many. So think of this as like historical tracking data of some kind, and you want to be able to go through and replay things in an animated fashion. So this is sort of the bare bones, all that's required for this feature. You have to have, the request. This is in the documentation, but just to demonstrate it, all you need to have is a unique ID for each data sample, a unique ID for what the object is that you're tracking, because again, there may be multiple objects that are all moving around independently, and you want to be able to know which position refers to which moving object, the coordinate, and a UTC timestamp. And that's basically what you need to leverage this feature. And then a data set will be enabled. So just because you have those columns doesn't mean that you necessarily want to use it for sort of animated visualization. And if you do, then you enable spatiotemporal, which is what we've done here, in which case you populate and tell Spatial Studio which columns you're going to use. Maybe you have multiple timestamps and you need to tell it what you want to use. So I've told Spatial Studio what the timestamp column is. Data is live would mean that this is a data stream, like some type of socket connection, streaming real-time data, and it's going to the database and we're reading it as it accumulates. We're not doing that here, and that's what's new. What's new is the ability to turn data as live off and say these are moving objects. We've got a vehicle ID and the time unit is minutes, but the data is not live. It's historical. So that's sort of all you need for the data. Now, in terms of animating it, I will create a project with this data. And I think the first thing I'll do is just change to this simple data Basemap. So what we do is we just drag and drop that layer onto the map. And because it's been configured for spatiotemporal, it has, all you see initially is a dot for that location, and then one giant trail. This is almost showing like where it started and where it ended, and one giant trail. Well, I'm not animating anything yet. I'm just sort of showing the data statically. So the way that we turn this on is if a map viz has a spatiotemporal data set in it as a layer, which I do here, then I can come into the map and I can say show timeline. Okay, that turns on the sort of the animation control. Right? once I do that, I can come here and spatial timeline, and I can add this data set, this spatiotemporal data set to the timeline. Okay, because I may have multiple spatiotemporal data sets. I don't necessarily want them all to be moving around when I click go. But now that I've added it to the timeline, there's that little clock icon there that's sort of telling me this is added to the timeline. And now I can configure its animation. So what I'm going to do now is, do I want to animate layer based on automatic data set refresh? Yes. And the time between refreshes will be like a second. And I'll say I want my trail to be 20 minutes of trail, 20 minutes behind of trail time. And then I want to, because this time range doesn't necessarily know what time range my data has associated with it, I will zoom this to the timeline. And then I will set this thing to what kind of symbol or marker do I want. In this case, I'll go to symbol, and I'm going to make it be an airplane, just to be slightly goofy. And we'll make it the purple airplane. And right. And then I can also configure the trail the way it looks, and I'll make that look like, pick how I want the trail to look. And now we can start to see things are happening. All right, so maybe what I'll do here is, if I say configure animation, that trail's not as long as I'd like. I'm going to make it 30 minutes of trail, so the trail's a little bit longer. And I'd like the trail to be a little more opaque and a little darker. Just like that. This is, and then I want my airplane to be a little bigger. So I'll make this 1.75, say. Got a larger airplane. And then I can speed it up, because right now, like you can see the timeline, this is really just marching through those timestamp data points at whatever sort of acceleration rate we choose for this. So I'm going to like crank this up to like play it at around 300 times its actual speed. Now you can see this thing moving around, and you can play with this. You can play with the settings as much as you like, until it's exactly what you want. So again, what's new here? It's not the animating moving object sort of thing. That's not new. But what is new is the fact that you can do it with just historical spatiotemporal data in the database. And again, you could do it with there could be a whole bunch of different things all moving around independently all at once. So that's sort of what's new here.
Maybe we can pick up another question Martin has put into the Q&A box. So he asked whether flashback can be used for temporal. Martin, do you actually really mean flashback in like we understand flashback in the database, or are you referring to more the way to animate?
So in the if by that you just mean like using flashback in an operation which will like go and reset data to a state, we're just going to read whatever's in the table. So it's not like we're working or integrated directly with that feature, but if you use flashback to like reinstate a bunch of spatiotemporal data, if that's sort of what the question is, then we're just going to consume that here. And if that was too naive an answer and didn't really address your question, please say so. But all we really care about is at the time this gets invoked, we just are going to look and see whatever's in the table that we're pointing at and has been configured to. So that can be flashed back, that can be like rolled back or forward or whatever you want. We're just gonna consume, because there's no other configuration other than we're just looping through all these points. And that would actually be kind of a cool example to be able to have. And that's, someone asked about Apex, and that's probably the kind of thing that'd be cool, having a map like this embedded in Apex, but in Apex having some of this flashback sort of time control built in at that level, and then using Apex, hit some flashback operation, and then the map would update and start animating things based on the flashback target. So that's a cool idea.
Yeah. And maybe regarding that last remark Martin put into the Q&A, is this something we can do via the attribute search you did before, specifying the timestamps?
Oh, yeah, if you did, so had some kind of nested filter, attribute filter that results in a slice of the data, and you want to animate that, then yeah, I think that would work too, and that we should try. These are good ideas. Yeah.
Okay. Thanks.
And yeah, and Tim's asking, having another good idea about sort of combining this with geofencing, and interesting that you mentioned that, because we actually have done exactly that. Tim, so we have sort of separate examples of using this with geofencing, and so that's something I hadn't prepared to show. But what happens is you have a moving object just like this, but the symbol and the color and everything in that object, that it will dynamically change based on whether you've entered or exited some geofenced area. So it's, so you have the animation, but also sort of the behind the scenes, the intelligence through geofencing to know when we're entering or exiting a region of interest. So you're right on with that comment. We've done exactly that. All right, so I'm going to dispense with this guy now and jump to another new thing that you can do specifically with WMS or web map service layers. So again, what's not new is just working with a web map service as a layer in Studio. We've had that for a while. The way that it works is that a web map service is a standards-based map service that provides a one or more endpoints that give you different sorts of maps, and the URL that you submit to get the map can have all kinds of parameters in it that specify what you want. So it's just like a mapping web service that gives you back a map image based on what you request. And we have a connection type to a web map service. So if you create one of these connections, you would just put the URL of the web map service there. I actually have one. And if we look at this, you can see that the URL is, in this case, it's land cover images. And so you have this endpoint, which is an endpoint that returns information about what maps and what maps are available at that service. And that's what you create as a connection. And then when you want to have a WMS data set, you'd say create data set and then web map service, and then you'd pick that connection that you created just to that endpoint that gives you a list of what's available from that service. And so here in this case is this land cover web map service. And what we see here is not something that Spatial Studio is. This is just us parsing what comes back from this service. So it's the NLCD, National Land Cover Database web map service for continental US, Alaska, Hawaii, Puerto Rico. And then you come in here and you could say you've got land cover for all these different years. You pick one of these, and that becomes a Spatial Studio data set, which is really just an image map layer that you can add to a map. So I've actually gone through and grabbed one of those, and I think it is here. So here is an example of one of these land cover WMS endpoints as a data set. And so again, this isn't new. We've had this for a while, but I could create a project, and then I could take this web map service and I could drop it in, and you see what we get. So this is a WMS showing you land cover with colors, which is great, but you need to know what the colors represent. And so what is new is that part of the specification of a web map service is not only endpoints for the maps, but an endpoint for map legends. So what we've added is the capability to, if that endpoint is available from the service, to let you access it, and we do it through this little link in the legend. So there's a little link icon there, and if you click on that link icon, and this is what's new. So you now get a legend from the WMS, which you can, we've done as sort of a floating thing that you can put wherever you want. So this, a WMS map just operates kind of like any other data set. So the idea would be that you can, that you can add whatever other layers you want. So you'd add other sorts of data to the map, like I'm adding a bunch of schools. And you can't see them too well because I created green dots over a image with a bunch of green. But the idea is that in Spatial Studio, WMS is just another map layer. And again, it's like, you can now, if that service provides a legend, you can access the legend. So I think that's hopefully helpful to folks. And one, I always like to mention it, like with these WMS layers, sort of good to pull back the opacity a little bit if you want to make it sort of blend in a little more to the map, and you can see the labels and everything through it. So anyway, I just wanted to get that out so the folks are aware that capability exists. And that takes us now to a couple of items around processing data. So I'm going to close this and then create a new project with a couple of data sets. The first one is another new capability is that if you have data which has nothing spatial, but it has coordinate pairs. So here we've got like from and to coordinates from one airport to another. These would be like two flight paths. You can now create linear geometries from those coordinate pairs. So to do that is a new analysis, and it's a transformation of coordinates to lines. So I'll just say, lines by lines. So we're going to start at from longitude, from latitude, and end up at the to longitude, to latitude. And you have the option of having the lines be rendered as straight lines on the map, or geodesic lines, which follow the Earth's surface, which is usually what you want. So now that we've done that, we see that the result is listed here as an analysis, and I can drop this in, and now we've got these geodesic lines like this. All right, so, and that obviously follows the curvature of the Earth, but because this is an analysis, I can modify the parameters and say, oh, actually, instead, I just want those to be straight lines on the map. And we can do that because this is all happening dynamically, behind the scenes through SQL. So that's a new one. In addition, and the other sort of transformation of capability is, I think, probably the most interesting one, maybe of all the stuff that we're looking at today, and that is the fact that we can now calculate routes. Routing is one of the hosted services that we have, just like the basemaps and the geocoding, address geocoding we do, and we finally added the ability to take advantage of routes. So I'm going to add another data set here, which will be a set of locations here. So I'm going to add these locations to the map. Let me just get rid of Dennis and going to lines. We'll get rid of that. So nothing but these. All right. So now we've got these like 6, 7 or so locations. And what we want to do now is a routing example. So the way that this works is you can route from point locations to either a coordinate or a pin that you drop in the map. So in this case, I'll just come here and right click and say drop pin. I could have entered a specific coordinate, but the idea is I want to route each of those locations to this pin that I've dropped. So to do that, we go create analysis. It's a new item under analytics and it's driving route. So I want to go from each warehouse to this pin that I just dropped. I want to calculate the drive time and the drive distance. And I also want to calculate the geometry. And it can either be shortest time or shortest distance. I'll go shortest time. So like use highways and run. Now this is, again, there's nothing that you need to install or configure. There's nothing that you need to do special for this because it's using our hosted service that, again, provides geocoding and routing and basemaps and provides those services to Oracle applications. So it's pushing those requests right now through our route server, and now it's done. And what you see happen here is our data set now has new columns. It has a route geometry, it has a drive distance, a drive time. So if I just drag the route geometry into the map, there's our routes. And if I, I'll do it as a tool, as a configure interaction. And then maybe we'll say this and this and this. And you can see the drive time and the drive distance from that warehouse to this location. All right, so this is really our first sort of iteration of supporting not as the crow flies operations, but route-based operations. Okay, and I have 7 minutes left to show a couple of developer-oriented items, which I want to do quickly. So I'm just going to dispense with this now. And I'm going to jump over to Apex. And someone did ask about Apex. And so I don't do Apex first. Actually, no, I'm going to wait for that and show something that's actually is generally available now before showing Apex. So from the developer perspective, folks generally, from the development perspective, would want to take things you do in Spatial Studio and automate them and do them from a programmatic perspective using the Spatial Studio REST API. And to do that, you would generally come into access tokens, and you can create an access token and use that access token to do whatever sort of stuff you want. But we got the message that people, a lot of times, you don't want to have to come into Spatial Studio to create an access token. You want to be able to programmatically create new tokens to be able to share with people that need to do something. Create a token so that someone can, like for the next 30 minutes, has access to some certain sort of set of resources in Studio. And to support that, we've added this new feature here, not a feature, this new capability here, which is this access generator token. Every user has this special token, access generator token, and its sole purpose is it allows you to create a new token through REST, and that's all that it does. And so that means that users can now programmatically create a token, and then with that token, can share it with someone again, and it can be a token. You use this to create a token that can do read only for the next 20 minutes. All right, so to show an example of how that works, I'm going to jump into VS Code here and show you. So here I have, hopefully this is still valid. If it's not, I'll regenerate a new one. But here I have a special access generator token. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to send a request to generate a new token. And the parameters here are it'll be a token that's valid for 30 minutes. It will allow read-only access to all resources. So if I send that request, there's the response. Temp1 is just the name of the token. Here, I gave that token a name, temp1, but here is the actual token itself. So that was just generated, right? So now that I've generated that token, just to show that it works, I will send another REST request, and this request will just be like a hello world request, a request to get the version of the running Spatial Studio instance. But to run that request, I need a token, and I just programmatically created one. So I'll just copy and paste the token here, send the request, and there it is. That REST request works. I could do other, instead of software version, I'll say data sets, which is another read-only request, so I should be allowed to do it. And this is a request that gives me information here about all the data sets in this instance. So I could see, here I have a data set called VLRS time DynSeg, kind of a cryptic name. But this is now basically showing that, the REST, working with the REST, that's not new. We've had that. What's new is the fact that I could programmatically create a new token, because that's an important way that some of our customers are using Spatial Studio operationally. Right, and then the very last thing is this new item coming into new item that's coming to Spatial Studio 24.1. And just to demonstrate here, I'm going to jump into Apex. And go to Marco, and this is Marco happens to be the great engineer in our team who's responsible for lots and lots of stuff, including what I'm showing right now with this new component. So what we're adding is a new native web component for Spatial Studio, meant specifically for embedding a Spatial Studio project map or maps into another application. So instead of just using an iframe and publishing a project and putting the URI there, this is a native web component that provides a bunch of hooks and interactive features. So you can sort of interact with and integrate your Spatial Studio map with the surrounding application. And Apex is sort of a first target for that. So I'm going to go to this Apex app that Marco created, and just start by just showing you what it looks like to have this new web component integrated. So this is a very simple application, one page that has a table, just a native Apex data grid on one side, and a embedded Spatial Studio on the map on the other side, and they interoperate and work together, and they do so because if we take a look at this embedded Spatial Studio map, it's just static content with HTML and JavaScript code. So if we take a look at that code, what we see is the following. This is the new embeddable map component, the web component itself that we bundle, this embeddable JS. It takes, we tell it where the Spatial Studio instance is, what project do I want to embed, of course, going back to those auth tokens, because this is working through REST, so we supply the token. And then in the script are the embeddable component features that allow you to react to mouse clicks, features selected in the map, and then you want to send that over, in this case, to Apex to do something using Apex functionality. So just to run this page and see what it looks like, I'll log in, and we'll see the interactive grid. And one of the really cool things here is that Apex, think of Apex and Spatial Studio are peers. They're just two applications that sit on top of the same database. And really the beauty of that here is that they're so perfectly well aligned. underlying data, Apex to create rich web applications, database-driven web applications, Spatial Studio for high-performance mapping. Sure, Apex has a built-in map region feature, but there are limitations to that feature that when you encounter them and you need to do something like maybe very high-performance mapping with more data than Apex wants to render using its map region, or whether you want to animate features or use H3 hexagon indexes, things that we have in Studio, this is where you can kind of close that gap and allow an Apex application to kind of inherit Spatial Studio capabilities. So what happens here is, this is obviously just a Spatial Studio map. You can include the legend so that you can, have control over the way things look from within Apex. And then you can brush back and forth. So I can select things in the map region and they will react in Studio. And similarly, I can click in Studio. You can see that in this particular case, the way that we configured this in Apex was a mouse click in the map will apply a filter. So by clicking in the map, you see that we've applied an Apex filter, and it just works easily because this embeddable map component lets you intercept these map interactions, and then within JavaScript here, in this case, it's Apex, so it's just a static region with JavaScript in it. We can send the appropriate request to the Apex API to filter the grid in this case. So that's something that you'll see coming out next month, and we're excited to see what folks do with that. So I'm going to stop it at that. I know I'm a couple minutes over, but I could probably, if there's a couple of questions that haven't been answered, I'm glad to answer them now. Karen, is there anything that wasn't answered I can jump in with?
Yeah, there are a couple of things that open. So maybe we can start with Mariam's question regarding the ORDS API. I'm not 100% sure what you are actually referring to, so maybe
let me see. Oh, ORDS APIs. Okay, yeah, actually, yes. So ORDS APIs can be used because in Spatial Studio, I think I even have one here. Yeah.
ORDS and tornadoes. Okay.
Yeah, so you can use ORDS because Spatial Studio allows you to create a data set from a REST endpoint that returns GeoJSON. And it's very straightforward in ORDS to do exactly that. So this is an example right here, although I don't know if this ORDS instance is running, so I'm not going to try to run it. Actually, it should be. I'll just take a chance and see. I'm not sure if it is or not.
Just to let Mariam confirm. So is this what you're referring to, Mariam?
Yeah, so this is basically treating
REST
ORDS
API
as
on
data source.
Data and using the REST API as data source, right? Okay.
She answered in Q&A.
Okay. Yes. So yeah, ORDS APIs can absolutely be used because when you create a data set here, GeoJSON URL, that can absolutely and is ORDS. And in fact, that's the example I was just showing you. So for sure.
Okay.
And so what's the next one? Karen?
Maybe regarding the sample application you just showed, I assume it's not publicly available, but the documentation will reflect this. I think we will be posting some kind of writing some kind of blog post or writing a tiny sample application for Apex you can download and work with.
Exactly right. Yep. So we're gonna sort of pretty up what I showed you and make it maybe a little bit more interesting and provide it next month when we release this. Okay, and
can the data set be sent to Spatial Studio by REST?
Yes, you can. So if we take a look at the, you can take a look at the REST API, And
So,
in fact, there's a YAML, for it here. So really everything that you do in Spatial Studio, like loading data, for example, like it's all invoking under an underlying REST API that is accessible to you as a developer as well. So the answer to that is, yes, you can. So you could, for example, have you could configure some operating system process that detects a new zip file landing in a folder, and then when it detects it, it kicks off a REST, post operation that or put or whatever we do for that to load that and create a Spatial Studio data set from it, maybe geocoded or whatever else, in a little processing pipeline.
Okay. So, Martina, is this the answer to your question? Okay. So maybe Plummen has asked, but I think you already gave the answer. How can this map be embedded into an Apex application? Maybe the point we haven't touched upon is how we could update when pinning this information or when dropping a pin onto a map, how to grab the coordinates.
Yeah. So within a map, actually, anytime you right click, so I as I right click somewhere, I can drop a pin at that location, or if I just click here, I get the coordinate copied to the clipboard. So I could do both. So and if I do drop a pin, I have the coordinate of it, and I can always go back and copy that coordinate to the clipboard. And you can also create a bunch of pins like this, and we can always go back now and get their coordinates. But I can also take those pins and I can save them if I want to do something with them later. So I could say, I want to pin places 1, run that. So now that's created a new analysis basically for me. So I could clear those pins away. So I've saved them. I don't need that anymore. I can now drop this in, and those work just like a data set. It's sort of like, it's saved I don't know, for the SQL types out there, it's sort of created a select those coordinates from dual type query. So I now have access to those as an analysis, and I could persist those in a table. I could export them. I could use them in other analyses.
Or you can use the REST API to fetch the data set and then extract the coordinates. Yep.
Absolutely. And if we look at the query, what's behind it, it's basically doing like a select from dual type of thing where it's just dynamically based on my mouse clicks, creating those geometry points. But it's Spatial Studio, so you don't have to look at the code if you don't want to,
Okay, good. We have a couple of more questions. Let's start with the first one. How can we use Spatial Studio in Apex? We've seen this. So you haven't done anything regarding SSL certification. So is there anything users need to consider?
Yes. And I'm going to kind of defer the details around that till, like Karen said, we'll have that sort of stuff as part of when we release this, how to take care of that. There are I think some headers that have to be set.
Settings.
Yeah.
In Apex.
So yeah, that's always a important consideration, and we will include that information in the in our examples and in the doc.
Okay. Good. So Martin asked whether soda can be used.
So if by that you mean like if you're, let's see, I know that there's like soda representations of spatial data. I think for Studio, it's going to come down to having a GeoJSON endpoint. That's kind of where we interact with that world. I'll put it that way. I don't know if you want to refine the question to something a little bit more detailed, but I'm familiar with the fact that you have, SOTA representations of spatial data, and we don't have like a native integration with that. So it really has to surface as a GeoJSON
And the
endpoint.
REST API. Yeah. Okay. So the next.
Yeah. So I see Martin just reply again. Yeah. So if there's like a URI that returns GeoJSON, then we don't care whether we don't care what technology is behind it. That's sort of the beauty of it. So as long as it's a URI reachable by the Spatial Studio server that returns well-formed GeoJSON, we're good.
Okay. So I think this also explains or is the answer to the question regarding RDS returning GeoJSON for Apex.
ORDS returns GeoJSON.
Well, yeah, you mentioned that we do deliver GeoJSON for Apex via the REST API fetching the URL.
Yep.
So is there anything to be done specifically to return GeoJSON in Apex? Or
well, yeah, let me just mention this. So every single Spatial Studio data set that you have, whether it's like just a table or an analysis result, you always have a GeoJSON endpoint that's automatically created. For example, that pin places thing I just saved, that's just a data set now. So there's this automatically generated GeoJSON endpoint. So here are those pin places returned as GeoJSON, which is accessible through the REST API, but it's also there's an endpoint that's automatically generated. So so that is absolutely something that could be used in Apex as
by the REST data source.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you could, a different way of looking at all this stuff as opposed to integrating, embedding a Studio map in there. You could do the analyses and things in Studio that you want to do. And then like Karen just said, you could have a REST data source to just fetch those results and use them like in a map region in Apex.
Yeah. Okay.
I see a question about 3D data, and I don't have any updates to show in terms of like, what we've done in 23 in that regard. And honestly, I probably would have done that right up front because that would tend to be the coolest. Anything around 3D is going to be the coolest. I can say that we are, and we're working on it because one of the important enhancements in database 23 is some point cloud features. And because that's an important 23 database feature, we want to be able to take advantage of some of those point cloud features in Studio, but there's nothing new that I have to show in that regard today.
Okay. Thanks a lot, David. I think we are through with all the questions. Thanks a lot for those. It gives us lots of ideas what you're looking for, and we can deal with in order to improve the tools like Spatial Studio and other things and services we provide. So thanks a lot again. David, thanks a lot to you.
I just replied to the last question.
This.
I snuck in a yes to a question about plans to support like raster data loading. So the Spatial Studio is the place where we're planning to have that happen. So that's a very good question. So just snuck that in as a yes in terms of our roadmap.
Okay, perfect. So the next Ask Tom session, I don't recall it exactly. Do you have the date exactly on the last slide of your presentation?
Yeah, I didn't because I didn't see it.
Okay. Okay, I haven't scheduled it yet, but it will be the same schedule as before, last Tuesday of the month. There will be somebody taking over the session since I'm going to be on a conference. But that's something you will soon see as an announcement on the Ask Tom calendar. Okay, So
Probably worth
maybe,
mentioning, Andy.
yeah,
also.
yeah, sure. So maybe you're interested in this upcoming event. This is something you can attend live, but I assume there will be the sessions be published on YouTube later on after the event. But of course, it's always a good thing to join these kind of events live, because it gives you the opportunity to get in touch with a lot of experts, to talk things through, get some fresh ideas, put your own ideas on the plate, and discuss those with our developers.
I don't think this is on YouTube either, so definitely try to go if you can.
Okay, perfect. Good. Then, thanks a lot again for joining us, and see you next time.